Which Texas? The flag Maryland. Which state borders the Pacific? Oklahoma. I am California and I border the Pacific Ocean. Which state shares a border with South Dakota? North Dakota. Indianapolis is the capital of which state? Indiana. Cheyenne, Wyoming. Which state? Wisconsin. Which of the Boise is Idaho. Which state? Washington. Which state borders the Atlantic Ocean? Massachusetts. Massachusetts. Which state? Virginia. Which state? Georgia. Albany is New York. Which of these states? Dover, Delaware. Which state? Massachusetts. Which state shares a border? Louisiana. I am Wyoming and I share a border with Idaho. Lincoln is the capital. Nebraska. Pierre is South Dakota. Which state border? Hawaii. Montgomery, Alabama. Phoenix is the capital. Arizona. Which of these? Des Moines, Iowa. Which of these states? I am Michigan. Which state? Mississippi. Which state border? Minnesota. Which state shares a border? Wyoming. Which state shares Wyoming? Which state? Utah. Which state? Tennessee. The flag below Missouri. Which state? state borders Louisiana? Which state Arizona? Which state shares a border Alabama? Which of these states? Which state Maryland? Which New Hampshire? Springfield, Illinois. Which state Massachusetts? Which state Wisconsin? Which state share New Mexico? Juneau, Alaska. Albany is the cap, New York. Which state Minnesota? Which of these states? Which Wisconsin? Which of these states? Which of these? The flag, Rhode Island. Denver, Colorado. The flag below, Nevada. Nashville is Tennessee. Lincoln is Nebraska. Which state? Delaware. Which of? The flag below, Virginia. Which state Florida. Which state Maine? Which state Louisiana? Which of these states? I am Ohio. Which state? South Carolina. Which state? North Carolina. Which state shares Delaware? Which state shares a Vermont? Which of these states? Which state? Texas. Honolulu is Hawaii. Trenton is the cap, New Jersey. Which of? Which state borders Kentucky? Which state Pennsylvania? Salt Lake City, Utah. Which state shares a Idaho? Pierre is in South Dakota. Which of these states? Which of the? Which state? Alabama. Which state? Ohio. Atlanta, Georgia. Which state shares Idaho? Which Missouri? Which state shares Virginia? Atlanta in Georgia. Bismarck is the capital. North Dakota. Which state? Washington. Augusta, Maine. Charleston, West Virginia. The flag below Hawaii. Jackson in Mississippi. Which state shares Wyoming?